Brother Brad is getting our microphones turned on because we want to be sure we hear Davis when he comes and leads us in Jesus Loves Me. Is that right? In just a few moments. So he'll get that turned on, and we're going to sing out loud and proud. Not sure is my microphone on? It is? Too loud, Bogdan? I didn't think you could understand English, Bogdan. Apparently you can. Okay, good. Hey, I did not mention it earlier, just while we're waiting on microphones to get up to speed. If the COVID stuff works out, we'll have another family from Ukraine, family of 4 coming in. Yes, we have a microphone working now. Thank you. Family of 4 coming in Wednesday night after church. Victor and Kate and their 2 little children. One's about 3.5, one's about 6. So it's going to be even more exciting around here. And then possibly another family of 3 coming in the next week. So we will have a nice little wonderful community of Ukrainian brothers and sisters. We already do. But it's going to get even better. And I'm thankful that we can be a place where we get the blessing of having these special folks with us. All right, Davis, speaking of blessings, you ready to lead us? Hop right on up there and we'll sing with you with pleasure.
I'll be singing Jesus Loves Me. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to Him belong. They are weak, but He is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Not all that long ago, I was preaching a sermon kind of based on that song. And in some of the sermon prep I did, I came across a fact that's out there, purported to be a fact, that no song in the English language has been sung more than that one. I hope that's true. And if that is true, there surely is not a better song for us to be singing than about the love that Jesus has for us, the love that Jesus has for the little children. If you would please, open your Bibles now to the Gospel of Mark, and we shall continue our study in here of the life, the amazing life of Jesus Christ, our Messiah. We're going to pick up with Mark chapter 8. This is right after Jesus has fed 4,000 men miraculously, and probably another 4,000 women, and maybe even another 4,000 children, for a total, we don't know for sure, but approximately 12,000 probably fed. And He's fed them fish, He's fed them bread. The leftovers have been collected, and 7 large baskets were taken up. An amazing day. Shocking. Chapter 8, verse 11, the Pharisees show up seeking a sign from heaven, testing Him. How blind are they? How hard-headed are they? I said shocking, but then again, there's a sense in which it's not shocking. That they again are pressing Jesus, blind to the obvious. And maybe you know people like that, just blind to the obvious, unwilling to accept the truth from God. And it seems like no matter how easily you can see it, they just can't get there or won't get there. Devil's just blinding them. Well, these Pharisees, again, Pharisee means one who's separate. They separate themselves from logic. They separate themselves from good reason. Then they separate themselves ultimately from believing in Jesus Christ. So the disciples, you remember this is where we left off last week. The disciples, when they get in this boat to go over across to the other side of the lake, you notice that in verse 14, somehow, some way they forgot to take bread. Maybe they're tired. I would guess that's the biggest reason. You know, when we're tired, we're more easily frustrated. When we're tired, our memories fail us. When we're tired, we perform more poorly. That's why it's great that you all got a wonderful night's rest last night, because that helps us. Hey, that wasn't on the list either from Proverbs. It should have been. Kind of ran out of time. But we want to get rest. There's a lot in Proverbs about how people that sleep in, the people that are lazy, they're not as productive. I know that most of you don't have an issue with that, especially as we're aging, right? Are you finding it more difficult to sleep late? Are you finding it more difficult to sleep all night even? Well, Jesus and his disciples, in fact, you can trace this throughout the Bible. People that were obedient to God, it seems like they got up early and got after it. They didn't want to waste time just laying around. And so these disciples, they've been trying to keep up with Jesus. Do you have somebody in your life that have that energy of that Energizer bunny, and it's just hard to keep up and they just wear you out? Jesus must have been that to some degree for these disciples. The energy level, the adrenaline that he lived with, he just stays so busy that to keep up with him would have been a nearly impossible task. You remember at key times of Transfiguration, they're sleeping. He's in the garden praying before he's about to be arrested, crucified. They're sleeping. They're not sleeping because they're bad people. They're sleeping because they're exhausted. And now they're going on a trip across the lake here, and they know they're going to have to eat later, and nobody packs a lunch. And what they have is one loaf, and that one loaf is not nearly enough to feed that party of people traveling with Jesus. So maybe they didn't bring enough bread because they were tired. Maybe they thought somebody else would do it. We can fall into that trap too. A lot of good things don't happen because we think somebody else will do. Have you ever, and this is such a trivial example, but we all have pet peeves, and this is one of mine. Does pet peeve translate, Kate?
Sorry?
Does pet peeve translate?
I didn't even get to this.
You haven't got, well, okay, now get to pet peeve. Does pet peeve translate?
Concept say it again in the sentence.
Say it again in a sentence, which is another way of saying pet peeve does not translate. A pet peeve is something that aggravates us. Like when I'm picking on you now, that would be your pet peeve, okay? A pet peeve of mine is paper on the ground. Anybody? Anybody? If I come up here and you come up here and you see a piece of paper on the ground, does that bother you? Does that bug you? It bugs me. And so I'm nothing noble. You know that. I'm just saying it so you know that I know it too. But I'll pick up that paper, and I assume you do too. And what would be a bigger pet peeve of mine if I see some of you walking past a piece of paper and you step over it, outlaw, and not pick it up, right? I'll stray for just a minute. I was thinking about school. I was at a Christian school south of here, so it's not Marshall. A Christian school south of here some years ago, and I was waiting on one of my kids to get out of a ball practice or class or something, and somebody had been like to Burger King or something, and they'd eaten their meal and they'd put their trash there in the yard, just left it there. And so I had time to kill sitting in the car, and I could be an observer of human behavior. And it was amazing how many people walked past that trash, walked past that opportunity to be a blessing, to serve, and did nothing about it. Students, athletes, coaches, teachers, administrators. Why? Somebody else's job. Why didn't the disciples bring bread? Somebody else's job. Jesus can take a little bread and make a lot of bread. I mean, we can get into habits because we're tired, because we think somebody else can do it, maybe we're overqualified to pick up the paper, or because somebody else can do it better than we can, or somebody's paid to do it, so I don't need to do it, or Jesus will handle everything. There are a lot of excuses, but there's never a good reason to not serve, is there? Whether it's bringing bread for the group, whether it's picking up paper, where it's encouraging Doug and Cheryl, as we mentioned this morning, whether it's preparing a meal for somebody that's sick or hurting or sad. God has surrounded us, hasn't He, with opportunities to do good. So the disciples in our text, they did not do, it's a simple thing, until it's time to eat. And then having no food when it's time to eat, that becomes a big thing, right? He asked them, or makes a statement about leaven. Leaven is what? And I don't understand how to cook very well. I can grill a few things and burn popcorn quite well. But leaven is something you put into a substance that eventually grows into delicious bread, right? We think of leaven as being a small thing that can become a big thing. Many times leaven in the Bible is representative of something good. Many times it's representative of something bad. A little sin, if there is such a thing, can blow up into something really big. A little drink, a little pill, a little look, a little touch, right? We know what a monster that can grow into. But also a little good thing can also grow into something really good, really big, really special. We understand that. So they've not brought bread. And then Jesus says in verse 15, take heed, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. He's warning them of these dangerous people, kind of like we're trying to warn our children about kids in school that they need to be aware of, that can be a threat to them physically maybe, a threat to their spiritual health, right? And when Jesus talks about leaven, in their mind, He's talking about a spiritual thing, but in their mind, they're talking about a physical thing. They're thinking about a physical thing. They think He's getting on to them because they didn't bring bread. And that is very disappointing to Jesus. Talk about pet peeves. This was something that aggravated Him. Because notice how He talks to them. It's the way we talk to our children at times when we have been disappointed. Maybe it's the way some people talk to us when they've been disappointed in us. Look at 17. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? That's an insult. Having eyes, do you not see? That's an insult. Having ears, do you not hear? That's an insult. And do you not remember? That's an insult. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to Him 12. So they got that part right, but they got the faith part wrong. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said 7. So He said to them, how is it you do not understand? Again, I've heard that talk from my daddy to me. You've heard it from your dad probably to you at some point. And Jesus now is talking to them in a strong way, not because they've forgotten to bring food for the meal. He's talking to them that way because they seem to have forgotten who Jesus is, just how powerful He can be. He doesn't care about the lack of physical bread, the lack of biscuits and fish for the next meal. He's thinking, how do they not know what I can do? I can take care of all these things. And what He's trying to teach here is beware dangerous people. Nobody's more dangerous than Herod. Nobody in those days would have been more dangerous than the Pharisees. And I would suggest, as dangerous as these Herods were, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees were more dangerous than even the Roman terrible leaders. But I get that. Drop over or turn over, please, to chapter 8, verse 31. This will almost knock you off your pew when you see this. This is Mark 8:31 and following. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man, this Jesus teaching these disciples, must suffer many things and be rejected. Notice who's rejecting him. Notice who's killing him. The elders. Who's that? Religious people. Chief priests. Who's that? Religious people. Scribes. Who's that? Religious people. And be killed. It's not the mob of scoundrels that's going to be after him. It's the people who grew up going to church, so to speak. They grew up in the synagogues. They were students. They were teachers. They knew the Old Testament law. They tried to live by it to a certain degree. And they should have known better. They should have done better. To me, this is a really shocking section of Scripture when Jesus says the murderers will be those least likely to be murderers. He also gives some good news here. After 3 days, I'm coming up out of the grave. You see that? After 3 days, rise again. We'll come back to that section a little bit later on, but that's one of 3 times in the book of Mark that Jesus says, I'm going to be killed and I'm going to rise again from the grave. He says that by my count about a dozen times. It's recorded in all 4 Gospels, which makes it all the more shocking that when Jesus came up from the grave, the disciples weren't there with breakfast, with fresh clothes. So we've been waiting on you. We remembered what you said. Happy day. No, they're scattered. They're sad. They're disappointed to come Sunday morning. When they receive early word that Jesus is risen, they still struggle to believe that. You know, they heard Jesus, but they didn't believe Jesus. That happens even today sometimes, doesn't it? Verse 22 and following. This happens one time that we know of in the life of Jesus. He came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. 23, so he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. He looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. So he sees, but not fully, right? That's never happened before in the miracle of Jesus. 25, and he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Now 26, then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Again, an essentially impossible command. You've been blind, perhaps blind from birth, perhaps blind all your life. And that is a tough life now, but especially in the days of Jesus. They didn't have organizations like we have to help. They didn't have Braille books. They didn't have the helping people and the canes and nobody would choose blindness today, of course, but it's a much more manageable life than it was back then. It's really difficult. Jesus has solved this man's greatest physical problem, and he says, don't tell anybody. How can he keep that secret? People that have known him all his life going to say, hey, you've been blind, now you see how that happened. And we see repeatedly when Jesus says, don't tell anybody, it just almost like lit a fire into them and they couldn't help but tell. And I would guess, and this is going out in a little dangerous territory, I would guess if there were any sin that Jesus would have an easy time forgiving, it'd be the sin of repeating to somebody, Jesus took away my blindness. Jesus helped me to walk. Jesus took the devil out of my child. So, but to look at this is a small picture here. We've got a bit of a challenge, don't we? Why wasn't the miracle instantaneous? Why wasn't it immediate? And this is the only miracle we have like that in our Bible. And you know, when we talk about the miracles of Jesus and contrast those with the miracles, the pseudo-fake miracles of modern day supposedly faith healers, one of the things we say, when Jesus healed a man, it was immediate and it was complete. Well, that's not entirely so, is it? From this one example, not every miracle was immediate, not every miracle was immediately complete. So there's something going on here where Jesus is wanting to teach somebody something. It's unlikely he wants to teach the blind man something. It's unlikely he wants to teach the world something because he doesn't even want the world to know about the miracle. So what is he trying to teach the disciples here? By showing that I'm healing this man step by step. What is the possible implication for the disciples? Why didn't Jesus snap his fingers or wipe his spit in this man's eyes and the man is immediately healed? And the Bible doesn't say. We're left to just try to figure it out. If we don't figure it out, we're still saved. We're still on the way to heaven. If we do figure it out, maybe we're a little bit more blessed than we were before. And so here is a guess as to why the man was healed in 2 steps. It's like a continual process of revealing. It's like a journey of enlightenment, if you will, that the disciples were under. We're at a particular time in their life that is real critical. And understand the big picture and the small picture of this. If you've been kind of following along closely in our study of Jesus and Mark, you see that he's been about the masses. He's been about large numbers of people, teaching them, loving them, healing them, feeding them. But from about this point in Mark, the attention of Jesus is going to shift more toward the disciples. They're not going to be big rallies. They're not going to be big gatherings of people much anymore. It's going to be a time of intense, almost one-on-one training of these. And he's trying to enlighten them, educate them of certain things. And you might even say that this is a period of gradual, and like they're growing in their knowledge. And maybe that's what's going on here. Just as this man grows in his ability to see physically, literally, the disciples are going to be growing in their ability to figuratively see the truth about Jesus, about who he is as the Son of God, as their Messiah. That's the best guess that I would have as to what he's trying to teach them here, that not everything happens immediately. Some of the best things that we're a part of in life today did not happen immediately. They happened gradually. Have you noticed that our culture, and you and I have bought into that probably, we're immediate gratification. We want instant popcorn. We want instant tea. We want instant. We want quick. We want fast. We're not so patient these days for things. But you've also noticed, right, that we tend to value that took some time to acquire. We tend to value something that took effort, that didn't just, you got some people, think about it athletically. You got some people, they're strong without having to work out. They can make the shot without having to spend hours in the gym practicing. But others have to spend hours lifting the weights to get strong. Others have to spend hours in the gym shooting to be an effective scorer with a basketball. And typically those that work harder and longer value it more than those that it comes in. Think about it with counseling, for example. Maybe that's a better example. Someone who goes to marriage counseling, for example, and it's free. They got an uncle that's just, I'm worried about y'all's marriage. I'm going to pay for y'all to go to this counselor. A person that goes and they don't have to make a commitment. They don't have any skin in the game, so to speak. They're not having to pay themselves. Sometimes it is less valued, less appreciated than someone who has to make a financial commitment. I'm paying for this, I'm investing in this, so I'm going to try harder to get something out of it. Kate, who is translating beautifully for us this morning, she has taught in a Bible school over in Ukraine, taught children, and we have different scales for what people pay to go to that school. We would love just to provide it free of charge to all the Kramatorsk community, of course. But we've noticed that if they show up and it's not just Bible, they're learning English with the Bible's textbook and learning values, great school. It's not just Kate, but several people teaching there for years and years. I guess maybe 15 years now. School's closed right now, though. But we noticed that the kids who came completely free, they didn't come to class as regularly as those who paid a little. And so it became a more effective learning situation if you had to invest in it. And we see that in basically every area of our life. You know, marriage is better if we're investing ourselves in it. Our education is better if we're investing. Worship is better if we're not just a spectator, but we're actually investing. We're singing the songs, we're reading the verses, we're actually giving as we've been prospered, we're remembering effectively what Jesus went through at Calvary for us. That worship is much more beneficial than the worship, and it's not even really called worship, is it? For the person who just shows up, you know, all right, y'all entertain me. This better be a pretty good show. We better get out on time, and I need to know all these songs, and they better be pitched right, and that kid in front of me better calm down and let me, you know, not be too big a distraction. You know, the person who comes to see the show is probably not going to be as blessed as the one who comes to be a blessing, not just to receive a blessing. And so the disciples are at a time now where all the lessons are not going to just be magically, immediately put into their consciousness, into their hearts. They're going to have to dig. They're going to have to go through some things. And in fact, you see this, it's almost like he's setting the stage for this. If you look at the end of chapter 8, he's saying this to all of us, but especially to them, 34, when he called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. That doesn't sound like instant gratification, doesn't it? Does it? And whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. And then he goes on to talk about really challenging things. And this is not a shift in his teaching, but it is greater targeting of a life of true discipleship now. And it is a process. It is a gradual thing. Are you as good today as you were a year ago? Are you as faithful? Do you know as much of the Bible today as you did a year ago? If the answer is we're the same now as we were a year ago, we probably got stuck, and we need to kind of get re-energized and grow again and do the things that promote learning and promote greater discipleship, promote greater growth. And these disciples, you can see them growing. They're not all there because the last week they're going to be pretty disappointing to Jesus. The last week in his life before the cross. But they're making progress from that ragtag group of fishermen, uneducated folks, that they were when they first were said by Jesus, y'all come and follow me. And they rose up and followed him. Do you have any thoughts on this gradual healing of this man and what the implications of that could be? It is a challenging page in the life of Jesus, I think.
It's just something to kind of agree with what you said. There's this saying that says the fastest way to get somewhere is the slowest way.
All right, Kate has said, kind of to agree with the point I'm making, she said, there's a saying, I'm not sure how well it translates to us, the fastest way to get somewhere is also the slowest way.
Yes. So like if you want to build your muscles, you can't just go to the gym for a week and you like hulk or whatever.
Okay.
So it's going to take some time, but the result that you're going to see, is going to be awesome.
Cool. Makes sense. She uses the analogy of going to the gym. And did you say the word Hulk? How do you know about the Hulk?
Well, there's a television in Ukraine as well. So.
She says they have television in Ukraine as well, so okay. So if you want to be the Hulk, our Ukrainian teacher has told us, you can't just go to the gym for a week. You've got to go and stay there. The fastest path can be the slowest path at times. That makes a lot of sense. It really does. And that's kind of the turning back point for some in the relationship with Jesus. We follow for the crown, but he says it's a cross involved also. I'll sign up for the crown every day. That cross can be a challenge, can it? It can be a turning back point for us. Okay, we got about 4 minutes left. I really want to get to this because Peter, he does so much wrong, but here he does it right. Gets something really, really good here. 27. Now Jesus' disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. That's 27. On the road, he asked his disciples, it's like class is always in session with Jesus. Who do men say that I am? He's looking for these teachable opportunities like we parents and grandparents do with our children and our grandchildren. So they answered, here's what some folks are saying about you. Some folks saying you're John the Baptist. Some are saying you're the great prophet Elijah. Others, one of the other prophets, of course. He said, but who do you say that I am? And in the original Greek language, that word you is very emphatic. Not who does the crowd say I am, but who do you believe that I am? Who are you standing up and testifying that I am? Good question for us. Who do you say Jesus is? Not who does your family say, not who's the church say, but who do you, by your words, your attitude, your manner of life, say that Jesus is? Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ. Now here's why that's significant. That's the first time in the book of Mark that a man says Jesus is the Christ. God had said it in chapter 1, verse 11. The devil said it in 124, 134, 311, and chapter 5, verse 7. First time a man in the Gospel of Mark acknowledges Jesus is the Christ. The word Christ, by the way, let's learn or relearn this. It means Messiah. Christ means Messiah, and Messiah means anointed one. Jesus is the anointed, appointed one by his Father to be our king, to be our deliverer. And Peter got it right. But then we got this shocking phrase in verse 30. Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. Isn't that's baffling, isn't it? He came to seek and save those who are lost. He says, don't tell anybody who I am. Later, the message is go and tell. Now don't tell. Why? Because class is still in session. He's got to spend time with them. And the more they spread the news of who he is, the more disrupted his life is going to be. He's not going to have time to teach these fellows, work with them. It's just going to, being able to function is going to be impossible. They'd probably, if they knew he was claiming to be Jesus at that day, they'd probably try to have him on a cross before the sun went down. And he just simply, that's another way of requesting more time. I need more time to be about my Father's business there. So please keep it to yourself. By the way, that is gone now. We're not to be anonymous Christians. We're to let people know who we are, who Jesus is. Look at 31. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things. Read this earlier. Be rejected by the people who should have never rejected him. The elders, chief priests, scribes, be killed. Good news, 3 days he's going to rise again. He spoke this word openly. Now notice what Peter does. Then Peter, I kind of admire this about him, he took him aside. If Peter's going to be wrong, at least he had the good sense to be wrong privately, and he began to rebuke him. He gets on to Jesus. Can you imagine the audacity of Peter? But when he turned around and looked at his disciples, Jesus does this in a public way. He rebuked Peter, and this is the strongest rebuke Jesus ever gave to anybody. Get behind me, Satan. Peter's not the devil, but he's doing the work of the devil. If you're not mindful of things of God, but the things of men. Love y'all. Thank you for being a part of class this morning. We'll pick up at this amazing text next Sunday. Have a great afternoon. Please come back 5:30.